I don't know about all of you, but I'm slowly remembering how this in-person stuff works. It's harder than I remember. Thanks to our AV crew for responding well to this morning's incident, as it were. Somewhat related to what we're going to talk about today. I'll be telling you a bit about how you can run your first game day, and my hope and my goal here is that by the time you go home, you will be confident in doing at least your first one, and hopefully many more.
Turn it up just
So to start, why am I talking about this? That question sort of works both ways. I'm talking about this because I've applied it and I've seen it work in a lot of different areas. There's research that says it works really well. A lot of smart people say so I believe them. We'll be focusing on how to do this to improve your incident response, but if you have some other similar type process that you want to apply this to, there's no reason you can't do that. Why I am talking about this is because I first was introduced to sort of this world of kind of game days and simulations through my previous career as an EMT. I worked for a 911 service for a time and was trained in search and rescue. And this was a very common way of learning. You might get a lecture or read a book or something else, and eventually you would have to apply it in the field. But there was always a chance to have sort of this in-between step where you had the chance to kind of play with these ideas and work them out. And when I came to tech, I kept kind of waiting for that in-between moment, the difference between someone sort of throwing docs at me and me having to actually carry a pager and do the thing. And at least in my career, that moment never really came. So for me, that moment that I kept waiting for, I wanted there to be something between hey, read this, and hey, now you're doing it potentially at 3 a.m. I kept waiting, surely it was going to come. Surely no one would expect me to be responsible for potentially millions of dollars of infrastructure, sales, what have you, without giving me some ground to practice, right? That would be crazy. We would never do that. Oops, I was wrong. So I wanted to bring that world that I had experienced into tech. And I kept hearing folks talk about game days. I'd talk to folks at conferences like this, DevOps days, and I'd ask, are you doing game days? Oh yeah, I heard about game days, or sometimes people would call it Ops D&D. I don't play D&D, so that was lost on me a little bit. But I kind of, yeah, that's neat. Do you do it? And everyone said, no, but I want to. And I said, okay. I'd wait till next year and ask around. You do it? Said, no, but I want to. So I'm curious, does anyone here actually do game days today? 1. Cool. 2, okay. So not 0, I'm half about that, and I'm hoping by the end that if I were to ask this again next year, that we would get the majority of the room here. So here's what we're going to go over today. I will say in advance, these slides are text only. They are designed to hopefully be easy to read. There is no motion, music, or video that you'll need to follow along with. I'll cover more than what's on the slide. So if you are reading a transcription of this or listening to the audio only, you'll still be able to follow along. I'm going to go over what a game day is, some of the things it's made of, how to actually put that together and turn that into an event, how to make it actually stick so that even though I say you'll be able to run your first, I also hope it won't be your last. And finally, at the end, we'll do some Q&A. And I would like all of you to start thinking now what questions you have that maybe, if were answered, would help you be comfortable starting when you get home. I'll hopefully answer most of those as we go, but I'm going to leave lots of time at the end to make sure that I have. So first, what is a game day? So to me, a game day is time you take outside of your work, probably coding, what have you, to practice using some sort of simulation, usually a tabletop exercise. So when we're talking about simulations, I'm not telling you to like clone dev, don't worry. It's just talking through a scenario. Now, you might have heard a lot about tabletop exercises from some sources like the US federal government is a big fan, the World Health Organization. Different organizations do this a lot. DHS says a tabletop exercise is a discussion-based exercise in response to a scenario intended to generate a dialogue of various issues to facilitate a conceptual understanding. Anyone else lost yet? I was. So, no, really. What is this? Really, a tabletop exercise is a lower speed, lower tempo chance to work with ideas, to work with people, to work with procedures. And you do so by talking through what you want to do, what you're thinking about doing, what you feel like you should do, and asking questions along the way. Now, I will say, not being a tabletop RPG person myself, I am a little bit hesitant to make the analogy to actual tabletop games. The difference here is that no one is going to be trying to really trick you or surprise you in some way. If you are participating in one that someone else is hosting, hopefully you are not required to be especially creative with your actions. So I want to go over some of the things I said about what this sort of does for you. And one of the things it does is helps you be more comfortable with a process. I don't know how it works for you folks, but you ever read something and you get to the end and you're like, yeah, okay, I got it. And then the next day, or even later that day, as you go to actually do it, you kind of stop and you go, wait, what was I supposed to do? It felt so easy when you were reading it, right? Because someone wrote it in just this like cohesive set of steps that, I don't know, it sounds right. It feels comfortable, so we have this inclination to fill it in and say, yeah, okay, I'm kind of nodding along. But it's a whole different matter when we actually have to do it. And that is the real point of these tabletop exercises, to build comfort with it. And also experience in working and communicating with others. Sorry, folks, if you don't like talking to people. This is probably not for you. The communication part is one of the biggest benefits of a tabletop exercise. And this might sound strange, but I've noticed that in technology, at least in my career, we'll say things like, maybe your incident response framework documents, if you have them, will say like, tell the channel that you are the incident commander. Ask someone about something. And that sounds fine until you have to do it. What do you say? How do you ask it? Are you ordering them? Are you asking them? Do you say, please? How do you do this? It can be very complicated. And if you don't believe me, I can tell you that in other domains, this is heavily practiced. When you go to school to become an EMT, you will, depending on your level, go through up to 2 years or so. I think they changed it recently of school, years of school or training. The federal government sends you a nice special little patch that you'll never do anything with because no one sews things onto their uniforms. But even then, when the federal government has sort of said, great, you are official, When you go to get your first job, your first few weeks will actually be with a field training officer. So even then, you'll still have someone training you and working with you. And it sounds, you might think, oh, well, that's because it's medicine, it's very serious. But actually, one of the things they'll work with you on, a good field training officer, I knew she had a card in her pocket. And the very first time you were expected to talk on the radio to call ahead and let the hospital know what you're doing, she would pull it out and she would hand it to you because she knew people would get nervous. You've been through 2 years of school, you've been through clinical hours, all this, but people still get nervous. In that moment, they don't know what to say. They understand that, yes, I have to communicate this information, but how? What's the etiquette? What's the protocol? And so even then, we would even just practice that communication. And that is a level of detail and practice that after you've done, you might be very comfortable forever after, giving that report over the radio. But without that practice, how long might it take for you to develop that comfort or even know that you were doing it right? It's also a chance to learn about how other people work. This is especially good if you're doing it with, if it's an incident response team or you're a group of SREs or you're all on call for your application. This gives you a chance to kind of develop some intuition and some ability to predict what someone's going to do. You might be in a tabletop and you might go through something and say that Jane has this great idea. You would have never thought of that approach. Your reading of the document was completely different. And now all of a sudden you have an idea about how that person will work in the moment, and that can be useful later. But this is also a chance that works kind of two ways. This isn't just you conforming to a process. It lets you surface assumptions that you might be making about your coworkers, assumptions that you might be making about how the process works, about the tools available. And it also lets you find issues in that process. That time where we're reading and kind of nodding is we're not always great at detecting things that don't make sense, because when we're reading it, we're not in the same mindset as we are of actually doing it. So this is also a chance to affect the process, not just have the process affect you. It should work both ways. There's no real right. It's up for you to kind of discover a fit somewhere in between. So I want to touch on two things. What don't they do? Tabletop exercises are not about the scenario. Sorry, really creative DMs in here. Those skills may be useful later, but for your first several or dozens, maybe hundreds of game days, you probably won't need them. It can be useful to design a very specific scenario, but reality is messy. The point of the game day are the friends you made along the way. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. is working through it. The odds that you will make a scenario that exactly reflects the reality that you will face on call is just astronomical. It is so unlikely that I suggest you don't try. Trying to do so can give folks the wrong idea. The point of tabletop is not to say, okay, well, we've trained every scenario, now we're ready, right? No, we're saying we can't ever know what's going to happen. I'm sure every one of us in this room has a weird story about something that broke, and in the moment, you said things just like, wait, how did this ever work? It should never have worked. And it's so difficult for us to predict those. And we should be focusing on the parts that we can, like how we communicate, how we work together, how we decide this process should function. Those are the things that we can prepare for in advance. It's not the scenario that matters. Which is funny because I've actually found that it's the scenario. Scenario is the number one thing that keeps people from being able to run their first tabletop. When I've talked to folks, I've interviewed folks about this, why don't you do this? Well, I don't really know, what we do, and tell you it's not about the scenario. Don't worry. So this is an overview of just how to get started. I know this is very draw the owl when you read this, but we'll go through each one. In large part, you'll make up a scenario. You'll get some folks together in a room, virtual, some combination. I suggest that whichever you pick, I'm not going to say one is better than the other. I suggest that it reflect how you intend to work in the future. If you think it's likely that you're going to be virtual, or you know for a fact that you are, do it that way. If you happen to have an offsite or something where you will be seeing people in person, this might be useful to do in person, but I'm going to suggest that if you have to choose one, you choose the way that you actually intend to work. You'll talk through the scenario, and then you'll ask how it went. That's about it. But as I said, this is the point where folks tend to get hung up, is developing these scenarios. So I'm going to give you a few pieces of advice. For one, you can just look through the incidents you've already had. If you write these things down, if you have some sort of process. If you don't, maybe this is a good reason to get one. You can think of ones that you've participated in. It doesn't have to be in your current environment. It doesn't have to be one you even were in yourself. Maybe you read a really cool one. The scenario is essentially a story you're going to work through. So you can take pieces that are useful, discard pieces that aren't, smash 2, 3, 4 pieces together. That's fine. But if you really, really, really can't think of anything, I'm going to remind you that scenarios are not that important, especially for your first 1, 2, 10 game days. So this is the formula that I will give you. Pick a trigger. Pick something that complicates it slightly. Again, we're not trying to trick people here. There's no trick questions in this. And then pick a goal and resolution state. The main point is to work with the people and process, not to work against that scenario. So I'm going to ask each of you, we'll take a few minutes to make your own scenario. Again, if you don't have any ideas, I've put the steps up here. We're only going to take about 2 minutes here. I suggest you write it down. Paper, pen, type, whatever works best for you. Pick a trigger. This is typically a page of some sort. I always start mine with, you are awoken by PagerDuty. The alert says something, whatever you'd like it to be. It can be that, the database appears to be down. The disk appears to be full. I think that for the folks here, I don't think we're short on the number of alerts we've seen. Next, you'll pick a complication. And again, a complication is supposed to be a trick. It's really just a chance that when you think about making a scenario, it's a chance to say, how do I extend this scenario in a way that wasn't just me sitting by myself solving it? Because chances are that's not the way you're going to work. That's not really, you have a lot of practice working by yourself. We want to add a complication that makes it someone else. It can be as simple as, in the scenario, I happen to not be a database expert and it was a database issue. There's the complication. It can be that the disk was full, but I don't actually have access to that machine, or the participant doesn't have access to that machine, whoever's doing the scenario. And then pick a goal and a resolution state. Let's say you're going through this with someone across the table, across the Zoom. How do you know when they're done? They're not going to know because you have the scenario. So you'll want to pick in advance when it's done. Maybe it's they restarted the database. They had to, edit the MySQL config file for whatever reason and, restart the service. But you know that when they've done that, it's done. Or you can also time box it too. Say they reach A or B. So I'll give you folks just a couple of minutes to develop your own scenario. And then I'll show you how, as simple as that may seem, it's enough to get you started. And then I'll ask if anyone has a scenario they're especially proud of, if anyone wants to share theirs. The reason I say here that this scenario doesn't matter, and this might feel awkward at first, is because just as you will become, and the people you run this game day with will become more familiar with the process, so will you. Running your first game day is key to be able to run the second, to be able to gain the experience to make this feel more comfortable. I've worked with a lot of different folks and teams where this can feel awkward for some people. Like, it seems too simple. And we know the reality is messier, but this is the way to start to interact with that, and the way to have your first game day. And then after you do that, once you run your first tabletop exercise, or the second, you'll also slowly get more familiar with this. You'll feel more comfortable writing the next scenario, or the next, or you'll see something. And you're like, oh, that's good. I'm gonna use that. You'll be at a conference and someone will say something. You say, oh, that's good. I'm gonna take that bit. So does anyone have a scenario or piece of a scenario that they want to share? It can be just a trigger you like, or a complication, or something like that.
We had a complication where deploy failed to build and then also failed to roll back. So that was fun.
I like it. See, it was fun. I think I saw a hand over here.
Keys got committed and pushed in a repository.
So that's exactly right. And I can tell you folks have no shortage of these. Each one of these, and any combination of the trigger, the complication, or as I should say, any change you make in these, you can run again. This isn't something that you need to reinvent each time. So you can work with these for a time, and I have a hunch that when you start writing them down, you'll find more and more and more of them. You'll just keep discovering them. So I want to talk a bit about what you'll actually do once you sit down to do your game day itself. In my experience, the best way to start is to typically only have it last a couple of hours at most. You don't really need your computers unless you're doing it virtually. I actually suggest that unless you're using it to follow along, pull up documentation, take notes, you don't actually need the technology. We're not having you, say, interact with the repository that keys got committed to. We're not having you, interact with the simulation DNS server. But if you happen to prefer to take notes on your computer, or that's the only place the incident response docs go, and you want to follow them and express it, that's fine. Really, it's just getting people together in a room, real or otherwise. So you'll put some time on the calendar. And I want to talk about, I call it positions here, just so that we can talk about roles separately. Because I think, usually when we say roles, we think of like maybe incident response, incident commander versus subject matter expert versus all these different things. So really there's only two big divisions in our tabletop exercise: the facilitator, which you folks will be ready to be, and participant, anybody else who is doing it with you. That's the minimum. I want to point out that I call them participants, not learners, because facilitators, you'll be learning too. Nor are they trainees, because facilitators, you're gaining experience as well. You're gaining experience with how the participants are thinking, where they struggle, what surprises them, and gaining experience with running the thing itself. As the facilitator, you know the scenario. You are in a position to answer questions. This is typically how participants will interact with you. In some of the scenarios we heard, a facilitator told me that there seems to be a DNS issue. I might ask, okay, I try to ping the DNS server because it's a series of easily memorable repeating numbers for a reason. Does it work? I don't actually have to type it. I just ask, does it work? And as a facilitator, it's up to you. Improvise if you need to. Some of the questions will feel easy, some of them not. That's fine. Just make something up. No, it doesn't work. Okay. I'm going to do something else. You can also fill in for other roles if needed. Just if you happen to be in a small group and you're practicing, say, instant response, and you say, well, I need someone to be communications liaison or what have you, depending on how your framework works. If you're short on people, you can say, okay, I'll be your communications person. Tell me what you need. And then you're kind of still back in that role of facilitator where you still are just getting information from the participant. And it's up to you to make decisions. If there's a question, conflict, it's up to you. There's no real wrong answer here. I encourage you to improvise. This is the other thing other than scenarios I find people get hung up on. Do you need special training to be a facilitator? And this is a complicated enough subject that I made a whole slide for it. No, you don't. Again, this is a chance to work with your peers, work with process. No one is requiring you to be perfect at this. No one is requiring you to 100% get every technical detail of the scenario right. That's not what this is about. You don't need to have special training. Obviously, the more you've done this, the more comfortable you'll be with it. But that doesn't need to stop you from doing it. There's no class you need to take, no certification you need. This isn't agile, it's fine. It's all right. So now I want you to put yourself in the role of a participant. And I've briefly put up here what the things that you're going to do. You're going to talk through your action. You're going to ask questions to get information, and you'll fill a role in the scenario, usually just one. It's up to you if you want to do more. I find that it makes it easier for participants to say you are essentially only playing one character. It's hard to play both. It works for you as a facilitator because you know to a degree how this will unfold. I want to give you some examples of talking through your actions because I've kind of visited at a high level. And in the beginning, I mentioned that sometimes people don't know what to say. And this can be a little bit uncomfortable for some folks or feel a little bit strange. I'm going to suggest that you literally narrate your actions, what you would do, and then let the facilitator, you want to respond to that. So again, with the DNSing, you say, I'm going to check to see if the DNS server's up. Facilitator might say, great. How do you do that? Say, I'm going to ping it. Okay. It doesn't respond. Okay. I am going to go look at a graph to see if it has high error rates. Great. How do you do that? I know that the dashboard is in the documentation. I'm going to go search for it, click the link, use my eyes. Great. Dashboard show no errors. Cool. So it's at that sort of level that you'll probably want to be discussing at, where your words very much mirror your actions. You don't want to just say, well, I'll find out if it's working. And as a facilitator, if you hear that, that's perfectly normal. It's easy for us, as experts in our field to sort of go, well, I'd know in the moment, and maybe we will. But again, part of this process is surfacing where we are maybe making assumptions, where we're running up against friction with process, where maybe you know, but maybe someone else running it doesn't. Now, I said that even though a participant fills a single role, another way to do this is to have multiple participants sort of act as one responder. And this can work well if you're onboarding a group for the first time to, say, being on call. You can have them say, discuss amongst yourself, and then tell me, decide what you're going to do. And that lets them kind of collectively be in the role of the responder without having to run, say, 4 separate, 5, however many people you're onboarding, separate sessions. And it also gives folks, if that really is their very first brush with this, it lets them be more comfortable as a participant as well. So talking it through, say, if they didn't say it, it didn't happen. This can be hard as a facilitator. Try to watch out for it. I make mistakes with it sometimes. Ask questions, ask for details. How might you do that? This isn't nitpicking when you ask folks, how might you do that? That's not our goal either. We're not asking people to justify themselves to prove that they know it. And participants should feel free to ask questions as well. This is probably a bit more verbose than you might already be if you do similar exercises or even are on call now. But I find that level of communication, it works very well. And later this afternoon, we'll hear from some folks who are going to be talking about distributed cognition, both across people and across our machines. And when we understand that idea, I strongly recommend you check that one out. It makes sense that we must have some sort of signal to the other people about what we're thinking, what we're doing. How might you do that? And tell me more about that are good questions. As a facilitator, if you don't really develop any more questions than those two, you'll be fine. So I also don't want you folks to worry too much about the research portion that I mentioned or get you on with taking notes. So I just want to remind you that I'll upload the resources after. I will put a link in the Discord as well. And I can also put some of the examples that I'll make of scenarios. The other thing I'm going to suggest as a facilitator is to be comfortable with silence. This can take practice, especially with new participants. Participants typically may not have done this before. If this is your first game day, it's likely that it's theirs too. When you rush ahead and don't give them a chance to respond, or they don't feel like they've had that chance, you may feel like you were waiting an awfully long time on that Zoom, staring at those windows. But I'm going to suggest you hold out a bit longer. Double it if you can. Most of the time, folks will come up with something. They're either just working it through. If you're doing it in a group, I find that folks wonder if you're talking to them, even though there's only 4 of you. So finally, I want to talk about what you do afterwards. And then we'll talk more about your questions as that. But afterwards, I want you to get feedback. I don't have a lot of recommendations as to how. Unsurprisingly, you folks know your teams much better than I do. I don't know if they're bombarded by like SurveyMonkey all the time, and the next SurveyMonkey you send to someone, they're going to flip a table. I don't know. If that's your team, don't send a survey. I'm not going to tell you that. I don't know. Are surveys rare and you think people might engage with them? Send a survey. You may notice a theme here. It's okay to not be perfect at this. You will get more comfortable. You will learn more as you do it. One thing I learned in being an EMT is that it's okay to not always know what you're doing, but that also doesn't keep you from proceeding doing the best you can. There are a number of sayings in it, but one of them is never say oops on scene. You can look, seem calm, cool, collected. You may or may not be. That's fine. Proceeding, doing this has value. It doesn't have to be perfect in order to be useful. You do not have to be perfect at this in order to be useful to the team. Participants don't have to be perfect at this in order for it to be useful to them or to you. No one has to be perfect at this. So your feedback might be formal, it might be informal. 5 minutes discussion tacked on at the end. That's feedback. Whatever way you think you're going to get information about how folks experience things is what I'm going to recommend. And the reason for that, one of the reasons we want feedback, is so that we can keep this going. As I said, both participants and facilitators are going to become more comfortable the more they do this. I think we all know what quarterly or annual trainings feel like. That's where we wail on the next button, right? Or we just guess at the quiz answers because that seems better than reading the slides. Okay, officially we don't do that, right? For our managers and wellness compliance team watching at home, we do not do that. We absolutely do not do that. And we don't want this to be that. So I'm going to say more often the better. Is that daily? Probably not. Probably not. Is it weekly? Maybe it is. I spoke with a company who actually does logging, but in kind of a non-traditional sense. They remove trees in very dangerous situations, usually near power lines, during and after winter storms. And they found that they were able to carve out a day. They've now called it drill day. They don't call it game days because they're big, serious people with chainsaws, I suppose, and they don't play games. I don't know. They call it drill day. And that worked for them. That was a cadence they could do. They could bring their scenarios, their experience, their things to the group, and it was their chance to have practice, and that was their space. And I think that's the key, is making room for this. And one of the ways to that, I know it's easy for folks standing on the stage to be like, oh, you should just do this best practice thing, right? And ignore the reality. Because no one in this room is busy, of course. So you should just totally do this best practice thing, right? But that's partly why we're getting the feedback. The learnings that you get, for a variety of reasons, should feed back into the process. For one, if you're not listening to the humans who are in it, subject to it, and you're not improving it, what's the point? And for two, I find that people a certain level and above the org chart, this makes it an easier sell to them. Why do you need this specialized time? Okay, you get it once maybe, but well, look at how we've improved the process. I think we also have all had our fill of business continuity documents. Quick, we need you to document everything you've ever known about all the possible ways this could fail because of business continuity planning, right? We've had a lot of that, especially lately. How do we know any of it's right? Any of it? Oh, well, we would just respond, I guess, right? I don't know. This is a chance to improve that, to say, well, actually, this thing we wrote down is wrong, and we've now made it more correct, easier to follow, what have you. And I find that makes this a much, much easier way to get buy-in. If you can't get a couple of hours, I know I said if you cut it down, do an hour. I would suggest that, there's obviously a point where it's too short. Probably can't do this in 5 minutes. But if it means if you can get, an hour weekly, but that's probably better than 2 hours once a month, having space where you can kind of return to this process where you can continue to build common ground with your peers is going to be very important. So I've left a lot of time for Q&A because I want to return to the questions that I asked you folks to keep in mind. And I personally don't like it when folks stand up here and go questions. And I don't know about you, but my answers tend to oscillate between no and yes 1 million. So I'm going to ask this to the group. Do you feel ready to do this when you go back home? And if not, what else can I tell you? What else would you like to know that will help you feel comfortable starting a game day when you get back? To the mic, please, or if someone could pass one down if you have a question. Thank you.
There we go, now it works. I'll re-ask. What sorts of roles do you usually assign people? I know it'll be different per team, but what are some examples you've used? Or do you just do based on what role they actually perform on the team?
I think you're asking about what roles folks would be assigned, like what participants. Would they be incident commander? Would they be what have you? Is that sort of what I'm hearing?
Yeah.
For me, I work with teams to do the roles they would likely find themselves in. If you have sort of I guess now more traditional incident response mechanism, then I'm going to say that the role you start with is probably incident commander. And then if you have 3 people and the incident commander person, that's why we have that complication, spins up, says, oh, I need a subject matter expert on database. Well, there's your next person, and so on and so forth. If it doesn't map well, that's where you can say, well, you're all just responders. Okay. And I'll play the incident commander as a facilitator, and then you're just responders, and you will do it. But yeah, typically, whatever process you are thinking of adopting, whatever roles exist there, whatever roles you're likely to be, if you're on call, maybe incident commander, and if you are at risk for being paged as a subject matter expert, probably should do one of each.
Okay, that makes sense. Another question I had was, I guess, what level should the facilitator know the answers? Should they be familiar with the exact process you should go through? Should they just have a general understanding? What level of research does the facilitator need to do about the scenario beforehand?
So for the scenario, the facilitator is going to have crafted it. They don't have to have written a lot. They can be prepared to improvise. So it's up to your comfort level. I'm going to suggest that you literally just fill in the 3 portions, a trigger, a complication, an end state, and be more familiar with the process you're going to be working with than the scenario. And I'm going to suggest that just because I think if you go the other way, you can create this cycle where you say, I'm not familiar enough with it yet. I have to flesh this out a little more, and then you never do it. If you do find that you have a scenario you're very comfortable with because it's one you've experienced or you just have that, then that's great. There's no maximum level, but I'm going to say the minimum is pretty low.
Okay. So it might work to start with a scenario you already know and are comfortable with. It might not help you to learn the process, but it's about doing the actual exercise and talking.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
So if you have the scenario, you're very familiar as a facilitator, your participants may still have never actually been through the incident response process. That's probably the bit they're learning. How do I page someone? How do I ask for more help? How often do I check on people to make sure that they did the thing? Do I check on people? Do I open a Slack channel? Do I do a Zoom? What do I do? Is a lot of what we're trying to get at. And the scenario oftentimes is a backdrop for us to realize that we have these questions.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
So our team has done tabletop exercises before, but it sometimes feels like they turn more into trainings in the sense that it's trying to remember which document to check or which readme. And it sounds like the process is more about becoming comfortable with responding, not necessarily knowing exactly which resource. And if that's true, it occurred to me, is it helpful or is it fair to do something like, say you got paged and have it be a page that doesn't actually exist? As if like, here's something that we've never seen before, how would you go through it?
Absolutely. I've talked to folks in other scenarios. I talked to someone recently who did logistics for the US Army, and one of their tabletop scenarios, it had to do with like HR and logistics, was you are visited by aliens. How do you onboard them into the system? And it was clever because what they discovered is, oh wait, we need a translator. Oh, we can't predict what religion they'll be. So we need someone to help with that. How do we anticipate that? What do we do if we don't know the answer? What if we can't possibly find the answer? So in scenarios not that important, they can be ridiculous. I have a colleague who I'm pushing very hard to write a blog post. She told me that she wants to do one around Jurassic Park as a scenario. I am going to suggest that if you feel that it is very kind of checkbox, did you get the right Confluence page kind of questions, that is a signal that if that level of detail and memorization is needed, and that's why it's sort of being checked in this way, that is a signal for change in the process. Because I don't know about you folks, but there's no amount of me using Confluence that like makes me type the right word into that the first time at 3 a.m. It just doesn't happen. And so if you're so concerned that like that is a necessity to your process, to me, that's a signal that thankfully you've surfaced through a tabletop exercise, and you realize how much your process as performed as enacted today requires you to be a perfect memorizing human at 3 a.m. That seems unrealistic to me. I think that's the part that I would suggest working on, as opposed to changing other things. So I'm going to ask you again, what else would you like to know that'll help you feel comfortable starting a game day? I'm going to ask that you imagine yourself back at home, ready to do it. Anything feel uncertain as you imagine yourself heading back, ready to facilitate your first one?
Hello. So a question on that. Do you find, or do you have experience or any opinions on whether game days or similar activities work better in like a one-on-one scenario or like a one-to-many, mostly context like keeping people's attention, that if they're not the active participant, keeping their attention and letting them absorb things? Do you have any opinions on sort of that dynamic?
Yeah, absolutely. Typically, I don't find there are a lot of situations where one-on-one is especially helpful. I think this can depend on your relationship with whomever that other person is. But I think that there is a danger that it too easily sort of becomes a quiz. If we're one-on-one, I'm like, very quickly it can feel like I'm testing you. Did you get it right? Are you getting it right? And it can feel very much like you are being judged. You're being tested on this. This isn't something we're trying out together anymore. And if you have a different relationship with whomever the other person is, where you're 100% certain that's not a risk, I would also question whether or not your assessment is accurate. But if you're absolutely sure of that, then I think one-on-one can be fine. I think that realistically, I want to say the more the merrier. Obviously, that has an upper limit. I'd say usually you want to work around team boundaries, whatever that means to you. I've worked with organizations where there's this other person who, if you looked on the org chart or you ask someone, is not on the team. But if you actually look at their incidents or the way they ask for help, they might as well be. They always get paged. They always do that. I'd say include them. So when in doubt, I'd say work around the team boundary as you or the rest of the team perceives it. If you're just an enormous team, I guess work in smaller groups and then mix it up. A big part of what is effective about this is getting to watch those folks you work with or hear them say something that would have never occurred to you, whether right, wrong, doesn't matter. As you do this, someone's going to say, oh, I would just restart we all have a service named Atlas, right? That's safe, right? I would just restart Atlas. And you'll find yourself, at some point, what? Why would you? Why? And doesn't necessarily mean you're right or they're right. But it'll surface this idea that maybe they are right. Oh, didn't you know that Atlas secretly edits DNS records on disk? I don't know. And without that chance, without the people there to have these differing mental models of how the world works, how the systems work, without them being there to bring their view, a lot of this is going to be less effective. And that's why I want to look at kind of the team boundary, people you are likely to work with. It doesn't have to be strict. You don't say, they're not on my team. They're not invited. I'm going to suggest that when in doubt, invite them.
Do you have a list of roles that are useful in incident response that would be helpful to outline for people that aren't familiar with the process?
I have a number of them, mostly because I'm a big nerd about this. So I think that this sort of traditional, the model that's become traditional, that I've seen at more places, that's based on the US incident command system, says that, your first couple roles are usually incident commander or incident manager, as some folks like to call it. You'll often have someone scribe, or communications tends to be a role, and that's someone who either takes notes or communicates into other channels or communicates with other folks. And then usually you'll have someone generically titled SME, subject matter expert or something, which I think of as just someone you call for help for something specific. I think of those as sort of the three sort of key roles, regardless of what your incident response framework actually calls for. Those are that probably represents a fair bit of the work and activity that's actually going on. And if it helps you to know that, this is something, if you are more comfortable, you can write that out when you make your scenario. You can say, okay, I'm going to make this person that role and this person that role, if that helps you feel more comfortable.
You mentioned scribe just now, how much documentation you do during the event and post-mortem. You kind of alluded to we're developing this from kind of a reservoir of documentation? Like how much do you flow back and how much do you pull that? And you kind of alluded to having the confluence page searches. Like how much are you actually using that live in the event and then flowing that back?
So I'm going to suggest that a lot more of it should flow back, because the point is to interact with this process. So it shouldn't be a quiz on what you know. So it should feel open book. So it's not a test of like, did you memorize what you're supposed to do? If your process is written down in a step-by-step place, feel free to pull it up. Feel free to follow it. I think that's great. It's probably the way you would work in real life. If you find that's burdensome, I'd say don't, but I would then wonder like what the process is. And in that case, that's again a place where I'd want it to feed back. Why is it so burdensome that, you can't pull it up? Is it that there's so much documentation, there's not even like what to do that it's there? It doesn't have to be documentation heavy. It should feel kind of like an open book sort of thing where I have it there if I need it. Doesn't mean I look at it. If you want to produce, I usually don't produce a lot of documentation out of this at first if I don't have to. I take notes, but that helps me learn and remember things. I sometimes write down questions I have, things that surprised me, just to discuss after. That sort of data doesn't usually end up directly back in anything. But for example, if I noted for myself that I actually didn't know how to open an incident response channel correctly, is there a naming convention? Is there something, is it public or is it private? I might write that down, and then hopefully what flows back is some answer on that.
Thanks very much for the talk. The question that came to my mind as you were talking, and I was thinking about incidents I've been involved in, to me, often the most challenging and interesting parts of the incident are what happens after the immediate issue is resolved. Like, we've rolled back, we fixed it, but now there's a flood of emails to customer service, or there's the actual discovery of what really went wrong. And I'm wondering to what extent the sort of tabletop exercise can take that sort of those post-incident issues and make that sort of part of the experience.
Sure. So I think that it all depends on what those things are. If you're saying, we learned as a result of this incident that this API we wrote functions in an entirely different way than we thought it did. Thus, we have a task to make it function the way we intended it to. I'm not sure that there's much to be tabletop there. If we sort of agree that like we intended it to work like A, in fact, it worked like B, that was surprising. I see that as something later stage. The benefit of eventually building so much comfort and familiarity around our incident response is we can then devote energy to the next stage, into looking at our incidents, into learning from them, into changing things so that they work the way that we want. If there's not really a process to interact with or a sort of cohort to surface, assumptions around, I'm going to say that a tabletop's probably not the right format, but that by doing them kind of earlier in the incident cycle, you've now, instead of that response taking up so much energy, so much focus, when it becomes that this is just a thing we do. We respond to incidents. They're difficult, but it's just a thing we do. Instead of kind of taking all the air out of the room, it then leaves room for that later analysis, that learning, the change. So I know we are approaching lunchtime, but I'm going to ask you folks again, what else can I tell you, answer for you, speculate wildly upon to help you feel more comfortable and ready to do this when you get back? Is there something stopping you? that I might be able to answer for you? Is there something stopping you that I can't answer for you? I'd be happy to hear it too. Yes.
Hi. So do you have any metrics or any kind of impact to kind of demonstrate and tell leadership like, hey, if we dedicate an hour of our week to do game day to kind of do more team development, any metrics in terms of that to kind of justify this kind of investment?
So for me, I try to make that benefit of process improvement. Oh, hey, we learned that like all our documentation was like pure optimistic fantasy, and now we've brought it, just even 1 inch closer to reality. That's the metric I prefer to surface, because I'm assuming here we're talking about numbers, some sort of quantitative metric. And I firmly believe that a lot of this is going to be qualitative. You might, depending on organization, see some number shift. Maybe if you implement this program, if you have volunteers for on-call, maybe you have more people who are comfortable with it and thus volunteer. I don't know. Maybe you don't. But so much of this is familiarity, comfort, learning that is very difficult to measure in a single number. And I would suggest not trying to do so. And that's why I suggest trying to make that metric, if you're trying to get buy-in, make that metric process improvement. I am kind of obnoxious when asked those questions by certain people, so I would be inclined to challenge them. When they send folks to a 3-day React, whatever type coding thing, what metric do they use to evaluate it? Do they comb your PRs to find out if you are some number better at your code? Like, surely not, right? So the notion that we train without a quantitative improvement is well understood. I think sometimes folks just have trouble realizing that that's what this is. That may not always be an easy sell depending on where you are, though. I acknowledge that. Yes.
On the slides, you had pick a scenario, pick a complication, and then pick a goal, which implies that's part of the facilitator's job to have a goal in mind.
Yes.
Is there value, or it seems to me that there's value in having that be part of the tabletop? If you're in an incident response, part of what I want out of training someone is that they understand when their job is done. Is that a good way to run it?
Yes, absolutely. And that's what I'm kind of trying to get at, is I just want you to go into it as a facilitator, not saying, oh, I'll know it when I see it, that like they're done, because they might ask you, is the service back up yet? And you need to know when to tell them yes, like you won, instead of saying, continue to play for some amount of time. It doesn't have to be an especially hard goal, but you just want to have something for yourself that says, yep, you did it. We're done, and kind of can wrap that up and step out of it and now talk about how that went, instead of it sort of being, I find that without that, it can be a guessing game very easily. Just like eventually, as I know for me as a participant, as a responder, I'm just going to be like, I type the following Linux commands. I don't know. Like, one of these is going to work. I don't know. I burned down the data center. Like, I don't know. So you want to have a goal in mind such that it doesn't feel like a guessing game, just so that there is, there is an end. You recognize when it happens. They know they've gotten there. But as you point out, yes, they ideally will know, because you'll know when to tell them, oh, it's back up and running, or you're seeing an improvement, or what have you. So what else has occurred to you folks? I asked you in the beginning to note down some questions that might be keeping you from doing this. I'm presuming by being here, there's some amount of interest, even if that calculus was, I'm less interested in Docker. That's fine, I understand. But at the beginning, when I asked you what questions are keeping you from it, are there any that remain for you? Any that occurred to you as we've gone through this, as you imagine yourself going back Monday Do you feel like you know how you're going to do this? In case you didn't notice, I'm practicing my facilitator skill of being comfortable with silence. I have a timer here, so I know how long it's actually been, not how uncomfortably long it might feel like. You can do the same in Zoom, by the way. You can enable a timer for how long the Zoom call is and watch it. But if there are no further questions, I am going to suggest that the scenario you developed or put together from other people's that you put in your pocket and ready to do. If you are on a team where you have the ability to schedule that, I'm going to suggest that you use the time between now and lunch to send out an invite and schedule doing it. If you don't feel ready to do that and don't feel comfortable asking a question of me here, I will be in the Discord. I will also be about if you would like to ask a question you're not comfortable able to ask here. If you are on a team where you don't feel that you have the power just to send that invite, I would suggest that you send an invite for gauging interest in this, talking to people about it, suggesting that you do it, at least seeding that. I'm going to imagine that most of you folks are going to be on teams where people might be more receptive to this than you might imagine. I mean, all of you are here, so I'm going to suggest that you represent your teams to a large degree. So I'm hoping that whoever does traffic analysis or whatever on the Wi-Fi is going to be like, that's weird. A bunch of ICS files just flew across the network for calendar invites, right? I'm pretty sure that's what's going to happen, right? All right. All right, folks, with that, I'll let you get extra time in so you can start getting ready for lunch. Thank you.